All right, welcome everybody. We are here with Mark Alvarez II, author of Dutybound, the first of a trilogy of the Lightwings Epic trilogy. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just finished the first book in the series. Definitely enjoyed it, and it was uh, different from a lot of fantasy and kind of books that are out there right now. So walk us through the basics for anyone who hasn't read the back of the book or the inside cover. Walk us through the basics of the book and just tell us where the idea for the whole series came from.
uh, well, over the past 10 years or so, I've been writing this novel. It's just been sort of like a pastime. I always had intentions of publishing it. The book's about, well, if you want to simplify it into one sentence, it's about finding light in a world where there isn't any. And uh, it starts with the Lightwings, which is, of course, a special item left to my main character, Lucius and Noon, who's a high maiden of Maz. In Terrestria, there are four great nations or provinces specifically. And Lucia's father has been absent for her entire life until she receives this message. And this message basically is from her father and sort of like is, as shortly thereafter is the primary motivation for her to go out, venture forth, and try to uncover the secrets to the origins of Terrestria and ultimately come to, come to terms with her duty or her purpose in uh, you know, what is it in, and her like seeking her purpose and her duty in saving Terrestria by being their salvation. Uh, she has to do this by way of gathering the virtues of light to combat the four sins of the darkness, and those four um, virtues are going to be born within the noble youths, the great nations that I mentioned earlier.
Right. Yeah. And so where you touched on it for a second that you've been writing it for about 10 years, but where did that initial idea, how did the
You
process start?
The process started because I was, kind of poor growing up. We didn't have a whole lot, and there was this game that I really liked called Final Fantasy IX.
Mhm.
At that time, I was only around 8, so the conception for the idea for Lightwings came so much more early on. But I was sort of like drawing up like it was my brother's game. My brother didn't live with us; he lived with my dad, and I was, you know, I was like super hyper obsessed with Final Fantasy, and it got me into the series. But I started like having my own ideas of building a fantasy world, and thinking about my own like sort of upbringing and kind of like what I saw the world as in terms of like how it's like how like basically about the like how just just in that I've always been like a philosopher trying to figure out the natural order of things, and I actually drafted up everything. It was supposed to be it was just a kid making comic books, and what is it like I was building characters and profiles, weapon sets, and thinking about it like I was going to publish a video game, but um, I didn't. And this was just so because I didn't have the game, I wanted to make my own game. And I also was a big reader, and I was reading a series of unfortunate events. And, I thought to myself then and there, like all the kids have a different talent of some kind. And I was like, what's mine? And I was like, I'm gonna be a really great writer. So eventually comes freshman year of high school, and this is when the true seeds began to get sowed because that year we were reading a lot of poetry, epic poetry more specifically, and Shakespeare. And uh, that's when I think it was when we were reading Romeo and Juliet, when I kind of came up with the idea of like bringing that story back to life, but from the original story from my source material because I keep everything, and then
Right.
adapting it into what is now the Lightwings Epic. The book was originally supposed to be 4 parts, but when I wrote the series out by hand and I started typing it up, the first part came out to over 300 pages. So I had to start cutting it down,
Right.
or I had to split it up. And basically, that's the journey of the story. It started with just me trying to come up with ideas for a video game because I lacked the video game that I coveted the most.
Right. Right. And you touched on it for a second too. So as you're creating this world, did you start with the actual world and kind of fill in the story, or was it vice versa? You start writing the story and the world kind of grew around it?
My world grew around my characters. The characters started the story. So what I like, what I'm really drawn to in a story are the characters. And that's why even in my book promotions, I was like, I want everything to focus on the characters. Like the characters are embody something. There's like, they're highly allegorical. And I built like their backstories, how they're connected, and I started writing, like creating personalities for them, and what their role would be within the party. And eventually, that's how the world started to grow. Is because like I wanted them all to come from different backgrounds, from different nations, and sort of like have to band together in order to defeat the enemy, which would be in this case, the darkness, or
Right.
the sins of darkness, the manifestations of man's sin.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about that as well because the whole book, like you said, focuses on themes of light versus dark, themes of faith. So where those seem like sort of personal beliefs almost to an extent. So how did your personal beliefs form what was going on?
I don't think it really was influenced by my personal beliefs in particular. So when I started writing, like, I think it's like a lot of it, my education. So I was studying in like the old world, and I wanted every single province to sort of be within a different stage of development within society, right? Within their history. And that's why Aldrich is so much more advanced, it's so far off than Maz and Pania. And they're like, because they have all the knowledge, and they're the keepers of knowledge, and and they're the land of scholars. So I didn't really it's multiple belief systems, but really what I was building off of and what inspired me to create the world that I did in the way that I did is because I studied a lot of art history, and I read a lot about the theocracies of the old world and how they built governments around religion. And that's just the time period that Dutybound is set in. Like Maz is in that time period where that's like, the central law of like the land, and that's the true order of things. So it's very heavily inspired by, just the like theocracies of the old times, and kind of like building on that. I don't really like assert my philosophical beliefs are more within the characters and how they handle certain situations, and how like they're discovering the truth. And there's no one set religion in my book.
Correct.
I think Lusana makes that very clear, is that we all have those different ways of perceiving faith, and like Leo, he represents faith in himself. Lucia represents faith in a higher power, and then Lusana represents faith in knowledge and logic and reasoning. So faith in man. And so that's like that's how I'm sort of manifesting it. I'm asking these tough philosophical questions so that whenever it meshes into this world, everybody has a different interpretation of what faith is, and it could be relevant to anyone. A lot of the never mind. I was gonna spoil some stuff. I was about to go there, and I was like,
No spoilers. No spoilers.
Yeah.
No, but I do like what you're saying as far as each of the characters. There, like you said, there wasn't a. It's not necessarily that there was a central belief system. It just was the overall belief in the light versus the darkness, and the, you know, the negative versus the positive, and things like that.
That the light and the darkness came. That's I think that's my magic system. What you would say,
Yeah.
like where they draw their power from. It's either like their dark side, which is like doing bad things, like not like you know, doing bad things. Like what it's more about the intent and the actions, right? And it's the light versus darkness battle. And the thing is they created the world together, right? And terrestrial, that's in its lore, like the light and darkness are like sort of part of the same being. And it's to show, like, kind of show that we all have a good and bad side to ourselves, and we all, you know, what one man's justice is another man's greed. You know, it's everybody has a different interpretation of what the light and the darkness should be. But I kind of developed them so that way, like, their their personal philosophies in life become their strength, and that's how they draw power, and that's how they're able to use the power. And you know, the Lightwings, and understanding the Lightwings intentions is, you know, is the key to everything. So
Right.
it's the driving force of the story, of course.
Yeah, and I enjoyed how that it wasn't a codified belief system per se. That it was more general, and like you said, it changes from person to person, as opposed to having just a strict religious belief sect that each person believed in. It was more general from person to person. So
I like to compare it to sort of like anyways, like sort of like in Game of Thrones, they had like the old, like this, like, you know, they're all sort of like all of the religions are somehow like connected in some way, but they all have a different interpretation. They all have a different, like the seven-faced God. There's like a different God, you know, and they all worship one of the faces. So it's but it's all connected. I just wanted everything to be connected, and the world to sort of exist in one balance, one nature, because ultimately the story is about saving the world. And yeah, that's sort of,
and
it's a lot of world building, I guess. I did a lot of world building.
Yeah, the first book was definitely a lot of world building, but like I said, I enjoyed it quite a bit. And I know you mentioned Shakespeare and Final Fantasy. Were there any other maybe authors or worlds that kind of influenced what you're going for?
So I mentioned a series of unfortunate events earlier, and I think that's where the themes of like self-reliance, and you can't trust the generations before you, and you have to sort of like do things. Sometimes you have to, it's like a coming of age. You have to, you know, come to terms, you know, that, come to terms with that, you know, you're fine, like you're an adult or you're on your own. And, you know, but it's also about finding a support system. And I loved Harry Potter as well. Growing up, I'd read a lot of J.K. Rowling. But whenever I went to, like, you know, of course, high school and college, I was drawn more to the classics. I think Dante's Inferno is what inspired the sins, and then what inspired the virtues was when I was developing the characters. It was actually not me who came up with the idea. I was dating someone at the time, and she had mentioned that, you know, hey, like, have you ever thought about putting virtues in the book? And I was like, no, and like, I never really thought of it like that. And then I went back to the drawing board and looked at the characters, and I was like, this one will be this, and this one will be that. And then it just sort of just trickled in slowly.
Yeah, and I did want to ask you too about the creation and sins, because for me that was one of the most interesting aspects of the book, because I think that in a lot of fantasy novels there's sort of like a singular evil, right? That everybody has to face down. But
I love where this is going.
Yeah, and in this one there was, you know, like I'm not sure if you read the Wheel of Time series. With the first, they have a similar. There's a 13 Forsaken, and they're all, you know, they all it's a, you know, you're facing a whole team of enemies instead of just one singular, one face, you know, master evil person. So was there any, how did that come about? Because that was one of my most one of the aspects I enjoyed.
You're going against one of your creators. The tagline, "The world was their creation until they sought to destroy it," is because one of their creators is basically hunting them down and destroying civilizations, right? And there is a singular evil, right? And it, of course, is going to. And the thing is that it's not going to be ultimately revealed. I think it's, and I don't want to spoil this, but it plays a key part in the creation. Something is brought into existence, and there's an antithesis to to Lucia, and someone there's a whole antithesis to her, and they represent something completely different, which is corruption. And that is going to be there's the sole source of everything. And corruption, it doesn't matter what sin it is, it's still corruption, regardless of what it is. It's the opposite of innocence, which is ultimately what the virtues combined together would solely represent. So, there's a duality, and duality is something that is drawn on a lot in Dutybound. This duality between the light and the dark, but they coexist, and there's something that keeps them bound together. Man, almost went in too deep with that one.
Yeah, it's hard to get into without spoiling. I think everybody will appreciate not being spoiled on the book. And another theme I want to talk about, like you mentioned with adulthood, right? Coming into adulthood, one of the themes that I picked up on was, it's revealed. How do we say this without spoilers? But it's revealed that the characters' parents aren't exactly
who they
say they are. They're not the perfect people that maybe many of us kind of think of our parents when we're younger. Was that a conscious choice that you made?
Yes.
There. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Honestly, that's very much inspired by personal things. Like, I talk about it a lot. Like, I talk about it is like, stuff in my life and what mistakes my parents made, I felt my parents made. But also it wasn't the idea of we don't have to pay for the sins of the former generation before us. We don't have to follow in their same paths or in their footsteps. We can be something completely different, and that is something that's very important, because I think even the political structure in terms of, because with the second act, we explore this aspect of tyranny, and and how it's anyways, I just don't want to get into spoilers, but it's like the sins manifest, and they manifest as the sin of the basically the parent in that situation,
right?
Or for that nation. And the parents actually came from the video game story. All the characters I created for Dutybound were originally for Dutybound, but all of the characters, Stello, Aura, Talon, Sigrinol, they all came from a story that I'd written previous to that, and they were the central characters. And I took pieces of that story and created the backstory. But it was very much inspired by aspects of my life, and sort of it's kind of like a telling of the fall of man, but within Terrestria, it has its own.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that aspect of it, because it wasn't so much, and again, staying light on the spoilers, but it wasn't so much that necessarily any of the parents were evil characters. It was just that they were flawed, we'll say. They weren't perfect.
They made human mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. But in a way that made them, I think that makes them more interesting. They're not the perfect people, you think of, and they have their flaws, and they have the things they did wrong, the things they did right. And I enjoyed the book exploring those aspects.
as something I posted out yesterday was that like I posted out what all the characters value most, and I said Lucia values identity, and I think that whole aspect of like and honestly all of the characters go through this, but realizing who their parents really are and being witnessing their sin literally quite physically manifested too.
Yeah.
They fight it actually, you know. It's like it makes them question, they begin to question everything they've been told, everything they've been taught, how they were brought up. They question aspects of themselves that like, is this really me, is this really me, is this really who I am? And Lucia struggles with that a lot because she's never knew her father, so she feels like there's a half of herself missing, and there's this whole other half of herself that she knows nothing about, and she is like desperately seeking to figure out who that person is. So she values identity, where Leo, he values Leo values discipline, right? He wants to be in control, and he begins to question everything when his pride is broken. And Lusana is what is it? She values the future, so she's highly perceptive and she watchful. She understands and soaks in everything she sees and hears and tries to make sense. She's a visionary. So identity is like, but identity being the core for Lucia, that's like what is it called? You picked up on, yeah, I think you picked up on it about the aspects of identity and the parents being, they don't know who they really are, and their parents' actions, discovering who their parents really are. They then start to look at themselves and they become flawed. They start out perfect, but then they become sort of more flawed as it goes on. But I think Lucia starts to, I love her evolution. It just, yeah, I'm not going to go too deep into it.
Yeah, I mean, it again, it's hard. I mean, one of my final questions when when you said the Final Fantasy thing earlier, it all made sense. But especially in the book's final battle, I wondered where the inspiration came for it. But now that you said Final Fantasy, I'm looking back and it makes total sense. With the avatars and the.
So I guess we can talk about that. So the virtues have physical manifestations as well.
Right.
Not only do my virtues transform and gain powers, they also have the ability to summon these incredible creatures. And we talk about the religions and also, right, and how, but the thing is the names that I picked specifically for the mythical creatures, they all come from distinct, philosophies from the past. Leo, the winged lion is called the Lamassu. We have the phoenix, and that was totally Final Fantasy inspired in terms of like, some of its visuals, I'm not gonna lie, just kind of like but I added some other details though. I made it more like a kaiju film, I think. I was very kaiju inspired. I wanted it like to be thought of like that, with the monsters fighting each other, because I love Godzilla. And and then Lucia, of course, summons the Seraph, which is Judeo-Christian. And then we never get the fourth virtue, but the fourth virtue is the Barak, which is the winged horse. And and everybody's gonna, that's Bloodbound stuff, but Bloodbound's gonna explore everything about the fourth virtue, and the tone is gonna be very different now that with the first book being out, and basically after all the characters start of their journey and learning all the things they learn, and it's all going to be about applying that knowledge afterwards.
Yeah, and that leads me perfectly into my final question, my final two questions. What can you tell fans about the next book, and how far along is that next book?
Oh, got it. Okay, so I can answer both these questions pretty easily. The second book, I already started on it. It's already mapped out. It's already got its characters, and it's already got its theme. But we can expect a totally different tone. It's going to still maintain that solemn tone, but it's the solemn tone that the first book, seriousness, the solemnness of the world. But we're going to get to explore. Well, there's going to be a more lighthearted side, because we're going to be introduced to a very deuter antagonist. I hope I said that right. So, and a tritagonist, right? And they're twins from the kingdom of Argania. And I guess I already have these first two chapters on my website if you want to check them out. But Ethan and Amarissa, they're twins from the kingdom of Argania. And as you know, the heirs of Terrestria are to acquire the virtues. So the second book is going to be all about finding that virtue, right? And the virtue, of course, being being love. And they both represent two halves of the same whole, at the same thing, twins, right? But they were separated really early on in their lives because their parents were overthrown and killed, and Ethan, who is the true heir to the throne of Argania, he is living as a pirate, and Amarissa is a ward to the emperor, who is holding her hostage, been holding her hostage most of her entire life. And there's going to be and that whole aspect introduces something so different, because they aren't nobles, and they're not going to be treated the way that Lucia, Lysana, and Leia were treated. They're highborns, right? But when they go in, they have, this. We are going to be introduced to a very carefree, freedom-loving prince who wants nothing to do with his kingdom, and we're going to have the ward, who is a prisoner, basically, and she is longing for her family, and they both are going to eventually come to terms with understanding what love is, and that's why in the ending of Dutybound we talk shortly about love within Lucia's speech of conviction. So
right, so good things coming. Yeah, that sounds definitely different from the first one, where everybody was kind of a noble, or one degree or another. So,
so the settings: tundra, caves, mountains, ocean, desert. So we're gonna cross all of those. I just thought I'd add that. Sorry. Yeah, and I already started way on it, and I'm shooting for a 2023 release.
Not too far away. Not as far as some books get pushed. So this is Mark Alvarez II. The book is Dutybound. It's the first book of the Lightwings Epic. So look for it wherever books are sold. I got it on my Kindle. You can get the hardback. It's everywhere you can find it. So Mark, thanks for the time, and good luck with the book going forward.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. You have a great rest of the day, everybody.